The chapel fell silent. Every head turned toward the altar where the Duke of Ashbourne stood, his hand clasped with Lady Charlotte Pemberton's, the Archbishop's voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. But as the sacred words hung in the air, the Duke's lips parted, and a single name escaped, not the bride's, it was hers, the Governess, the woman society had told him to forget. In that moment, 200 years of aristocratic tradition shattered like glass, and a scandal was born that would echo through every drawing room in England. But to understand how a humble governess could bring the most powerful duke in the realm to his knees, we must go back 6 months, to the day she first arrived at Ashbourne Hall. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has travelled. The autumn rain fell in sheets across the Yorkshire moors as the hired coach rattled up the long drive to Ashbourne Hall. Inside, Miss Eleanor Hartley pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the great estate emerge through the mist, like something from a Gothic novel. Towers of grey stone pierced the turbulent sky, while formal gardens stretched in geometric precision toward distant woodlands. It was a world away from the modest cottage in Hampshire where she had grown up, the daughter of a country vicar whose meagre living had barely kept them fed. Eleanor was 23, though her circumstances had aged her beyond her years. Her father's death 2 years prior had left her and her invalid mother dependent on the charity of distant relatives, a position that had grown increasingly untenable. When the advertisement had appeared in the Times, Governess required, Duke of Ashbourne seeks educated woman of impeccable character to instruct 3 children, ages 6 to 12, Eleanor had applied with little hope. Surely such a prestigious position would attract hundreds of applicants. Yet here she was, having been selected from what the housekeeper's letter had called an embarrassment of candidates. The salary offered was generous enough to secure her mother's care in a respectable boarding house, with a small sum remaining for Eleanor's own modest needs. It was more than she had dared dream possible. The coach lurched to a halt before the main entrance, where a severe-looking woman in black bombazine waited beneath a stone portico. This was Mrs. Blackwood, the head housekeeper, whose interview letter had been as crisp and exacting as her appearance suggested. "Miss Hartley," Mrs. Blackwood said without preamble as Eleanor descended, her plain grey travelling dress immediately marking her as neither servant nor equal in this rarefied world. "You are precisely on time. His Grace appreciates punctuality. Your trunks will be taken to the Governess' quarters in the East Wing. Follow me." Eleanor barely had time to glimpse the magnificent entrance hall, all marble columns and ancestral portraits glaring down with aristocratic disdain, before Mrs. Blackwood swept her through a warren of corridors. The housekeeper spoke rapidly as they walked, outlining the household's elaborate hierarchy and the strict protocols Eleanor must observe. "You will take your meals in the schoolroom with the children," Mrs. Blackwood explained, her keys jangling at her waist. "You are not to fraternize with the household staff, nor are you to presume familiarity with the family. His Grace is most particular about maintaining proper boundaries. The children have proven difficult with previous governesses. 7 have resigned in the past 18 months. Eleanor's steps faltered. 7? Indeed. Mrs. Blackwood's expression remained impassive. Lady Amelia, Lord Thomas, and Lady Catherine are high-spirited children who have suffered the loss of their mother. The late Duchess passed 3 years ago, and His Grace has struggled to manage them alone. He is often in London on parliamentary business, leaving them to their own devices. They have grown unruly. They climbed a narrow staircase to the 3rd floor, emerging into a long corridor lined with doors. Mrs. Blackwood pushed open the 3rd on the left, revealing a surprisingly pleasant suite of rooms. A small sitting area led to a modest bedroom, both furnished with simple but quality pieces. Tall windows overlooked the gardens, and a fire had been laid in the grate. "You will have Sunday afternoons free, provided the children's studies are current," Mrs. Blackwood continued. Breakfast is at 8, lessons commence at 9 and continue until 4, with appropriate intervals for meals and recreation. The children are currently with their nurse. You will meet them at dinner, which is served in the nursery dining room at 6. As if on cue, a tremendous crash echoed from somewhere below, followed by childish shrieks and the harried voice of an older woman pleading for order. Mrs. Blackwood sighed heavily. That will be Nurse Pritchard, attempting to contain them. I shall leave you to settle in, Miss Hartley. I suggest you rest while you can. You will need your strength. With that ominous pronouncement she departed, leaving Eleanor alone in her new quarters. The next few hours passed in a blur of unpacking and nervous anticipation. Eleanor changed into her best day dress, a serviceable dove-grey muslin with modest trim, and attempted to tame her chestnut curls into a severe knot at the nape of her neck. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a young woman with large hazel eyes, a dusting of freckles across her nose despite years of applying lemon juice, and a determined set to her jaw that her mother always said indicated stubbornness. At precisely 6 o'clock, a young maid appeared to escort her to the nursery wing. The girl, who introduced herself as Mary, cast sympathetic glances at Eleanor as they walked. "Begging your pardon, miss," Mary whispered, "but you seem a kind lady. Don't let the little terrors drive you away like they done the others. They're not bad children truly, just hurting and angry like." Before Eleanor could respond, they arrived at a set of double doors from which emanated the sounds of absolute chaos. Mary knocked, received no answer, and simply pushed the doors open to reveal a scene of spectacular disorder. The nursery dining room was a large, airy space that should have been charming with its painted murals and child-sized furniture. Instead, it resembled a battlefield. Food had been flung across the table, a china teapot lay in pieces on the floor, and 3 children, ranging from a small girl of perhaps 6 to a gangly boy approaching adolescence, stood atop chairs, wielding makeshift weapons fashioned from fireplace pokers. "I am the Pirate King!" shouted the boy, who must be Lord Thomas, waving his poker at an elderly woman cowering in the corner. "Surrender or walk the plank!" "And I'm the Pirate Queen!" added the middle child, a girl of about 9 with wild blonde curls escaping her ribbon. This would be Lady Catherine. "We take no prisoners." The youngest, Lady Amelia, simply giggled with delight, her face smeared with jam and her pinafore stained beyond redemption. Eleanor took in the scene with growing dismay, but also a curious sense of recognition. These were not wicked children. They were neglected ones, acting out in the only way they knew to demand attention. She stepped fully into the room and spoke in a calm, clear voice that cut through the chaos. "Lord Thomas, Lady Catherine, Lady Amelia, I am Miss Eleanor Hartley, your new governess. I suggest you lower your weapons and step down from the furniture before someone is injured." 3 pairs of eyes turned to regard her with open hostility. Lord Thomas, who appeared to be about 12 with the Duke's dark hair and sharp features, sneered openly. "Another one? How long will you last, I wonder? Miss Pemberton made it 3 days. Miss Aldridge a full week before she fled in tears." "I have no intention of fleeing," Eleanor replied evenly. "I have been hired to educate you, and that is precisely what I shall do. Now, shall we begin by cleaning this mess? Or would you prefer I inform your father that you prefer chaos to civilization?" "Our father doesn't care what we do," Lady Catherine said with a bitterness that seemed far too mature for her years. "He's too busy in London with his important friends and his plans to remarry that horrible Lady Charlotte." Eleanor filed away this information so the Duke was engaged, while maintaining her composure. "Nevertheless, you will clean this room and prepare for a proper meal. We shall start fresh tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp in the schoolroom. I expect you to arrive punctually, with clean hands and faces ready to learn." "And if we refuse?" Thomas challenged. Eleanor smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Then you will discover I am considerably more stubborn than any governess you have previously encountered. I assure you, my lord, I have endured far greater hardships than 3 spoiled children throwing tantrums." For a moment, she thought Thomas might argue further. But something in her steady gaze made him lower his poker and step down from the chair. His sisters followed suit, suddenly uncertain in the face of this calm authority. As Eleanor helped Nurse Pritchard restore order, she caught her first glimpse of the man who would change her life forever. Through the nursery windows, a rider approached the house, his great black horse moving with powerful grace across the rain-soaked grounds. Even at a distance, there was something commanding about the figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the unconscious arrogance of a man born to rule, the Duke of Ashbourne had returned home. Eleanor's first week at Ashbourne Hall passed in a demanding blur of establishing routines and earning the grudging respect of her 3 charges. She discovered that beneath their rebellion lay remarkable minds, hungry for intellectual challenge. Lord Thomas possessed a fierce intelligence that had been languishing for lack of proper instruction. Lady Catherine demonstrated an artistic talent that bloomed when given quality materials and genuine praise. Even little Lady Amelia, though prone to tantrums, showed a sweet nature when treated with patient kindness rather than exasperated scolding. The Duke himself remained an absent presence, a portrait glimpsed in hallways and a deep voice heard occasionally from the library below. Eleanor had been informed by Mrs. Blackwood that His Grace would conduct a formal interview to assess her progress at the end of her first fortnight. Until then, she was to focus entirely on her charges. It was a grey November morning when Eleanor's carefully ordered world collided with the master of the house. She had taken the children outdoors for a nature study lesson, believing fresh air and practical application would serve better than another morning confined to the schoolroom. They were examining the architectural features of the estate's Gothic folly, Eleanor pointing out the mock medieval elements and explaining their historical precedents, when a stern voice cut through her lecture. What precisely is the meaning of this? Eleanor turned to find the Duke of Ashbourne striding across the lawn, his expression thunderous. Up close, he was even more imposing than his distant silhouette had suggested. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with the build of a man who rode and fenced regularly. His hair was black as a raven's wing, swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite, all strong jaw, high cheekbones, and piercing grey eyes that seemed to assess and judge in a single glance. He was perhaps 30, in the prime of his life and power, and he radiated the absolute authority of a man accustomed to instant obedience. He was also, Eleanor noted with an entirely inappropriate flutter in her chest, devastatingly handsome. "Your Grace," she said, dropping into a curtsy that her charges reluctantly mimicked. "I am Miss Hartley, the new governess. We are conducting a practical lesson in history and architecture." "I can see that, Miss Hartley." His voice was as cold as the November wind. "What I question is your judgment in removing the children from the schoolroom without seeking permission. They are to remain under supervision indoors." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, part embarrassment, part indignation. "With respect, Your Grace, children require physical exercise and exposure to fresh air for optimal health and learning. We have been working diligently all week, and I deemed a practical application lesson appropriate." "You deemed?" The Duke's eyes narrowed. "You have been in my employ for barely 7 days, Miss Hartley, and already you take liberties with my instructions. Mrs. Blackwood was quite clear about the parameters of your position." "Mrs. Blackwood is an excellent housekeeper," Eleanor replied, struggling to keep her tone respectful despite her growing irritation. "But with due respect, she is not an educational expert. These children have been confined and contained like prisoners. What they need is engagement, challenge, and yes, fresh air and reasonable freedom." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Lord Thomas, Lady Catherine, and Lady Amelia stood frozen, watching this unprecedented challenge to their father's authority with wide eyes. The Duke's expression had gone from cold to glacial. "Miss Hartley, you will return the children to the house immediately and report to my study in 1 hour. We will discuss the boundaries of your position in detail." He turned on his heel and strode away before Eleanor could respond, leaving her trembling with a mixture of anger and apprehension. She had just contradicted a duke, one of the most powerful men in England, and would almost certainly be dismissed. Yet looking at the children's faces, she saw something that made her defiance worthwhile. They were looking at her with a new expression, respect, and perhaps the beginnings of genuine affection. "Come," she said quietly. "Let us return to the schoolroom. We shall continue our lesson there." An hour later, Eleanor stood outside the Duke's study, her hands clasped tightly to prevent their trembling. She had changed into her most severe dress and scraped her hair back so tightly it made her temples ache. If she was to be dismissed, she would face it with dignity. A curt enter answered her knock. The study was a magnificent room, lined with leather-bound volumes and dominated by a massive mahogany desk. The Duke sat behind it, still dressed in his riding clothes, reviewing what appeared to be parliamentary documents. He did not look up for a full minute, a power play that would have been obvious even to someone far less perceptive than Eleanor. "Sit," he finally said, gesturing to a chair opposite his desk. Eleanor sat, her spine rigid, meeting his gaze directly when he finally deigned to look at her. "Miss Hartley, you come with impeccable references. My solicitor's inquiries revealed you to be well-educated, patient, and highly capable. Your father was a respected scholar before he took his living. You yourself have studied Latin, French, literature, and the natural sciences to an impressive degree. This is why I selected you from the considerable number of applicants. I am honored by your confidence, Your Grace," Eleanor said carefully. "However," he continued, his voice hardening, "you also appear to possess an unfortunate tendency toward independence of thought and action. This is not a quality I prize in an employee. My children require structure, discipline, and strict adherence to the routines established for their welfare. Forgive me, Your Grace, but I must disagree." The words were out before Eleanor could stop them. "Your children do not require more structure. They are drowning in structure. What they require is a parent." The Duke's hands stilled on the papers before him. When he looked up, his eyes were as cold as winter frost. "I beg your pardon?" Eleanor knew she should retreat, apologize, accept her dismissal with grace. But looking at this powerful, proud man, she saw something that emboldened her. Grief, carefully buried but unmistakable to someone who had known her own share of loss. "Your Grace, I have spent 7 days with your children. They are remarkable, intelligent, creative, and desperately starved for attention. They misbehave not because they are wicked, but because negative attention is better than none at all. They miss their mother, and if I may speak plainly, they miss their father as well." "You may not speak plainly," the Duke said icily. "You are a governess, not a family counselor. My relationship with my children is none of your concern." "Then I shall concern myself only with their education," Eleanor replied, her own temper finally breaking through her caution. "But I will not cage them like wild animals to make your household run more smoothly. If you wish me to educate them properly, you will trust my judgment on pedagogical matters. If you cannot do that, then I suggest you find another governess, number 8 in 18 months, and watch your children grow into bitter, resentful adults who remember their childhood as a prison." The Duke rose slowly from his chair, and Eleanor realized she had gone too far. He was furious. She could see it in the rigid set of his jaw, the white-knuckled grip on the desk's edge. "You are impertinent, presumptuous, and insubordinate," he said, each word clipped and precise. "I should dismiss you immediately." "Yes, Your Grace, you should." Eleanor stood as well, meeting his gaze despite the significant difference in their heights. "But you won't, because you know I'm right. Your children are thriving under my instruction. Lord Thomas completed his Latin translation yesterday with perfect accuracy. Lady Catherine's watercolour studies showed genuine artistic promise. Lady Amelia can now recite her letters without tears. In 7 days, I have accomplished what 7 previous governesses could not. So dismiss me if you must, Your Grace, but know that you are choosing pride over your children's welfare." For a long moment, they stood there, locked in a battle of wills across the expanse of the mahogany desk. Eleanor was acutely aware of everything about him, the faint scent of sandalwood and leather, the way a muscle ticked in his jaw, the unexpected flecks of blue in his grey eyes. He was magnetic, commanding, and utterly infuriating. Then, to her complete astonishment, the corner of his mouth twitched. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Miss Hartley," he said, and there was something new in his voice. Not warmth exactly, but a grudging respect. "Very well, you may continue with your outdoor lessons, within reason. But you will inform Mrs. Blackwood of your whereabouts at all times, and the children are not to leave the estate grounds." "Thank you, Your Grace." Eleanor managed a curtsy, her legs suddenly weak with relief. "Do not mistake my acquiescence for approval," he added sharply. "I am allowing this experiment because my children's education is paramount, but I expect regular reports on their progress, and any further insubordination will result in immediate dismissal. Am I understood?" "Perfectly, Your Grace." "Then you are dismissed." Eleanor fled the study, her heart pounding. She had not only survived the encounter, but somehow won a significant concession. It was only later, as she prepared the children's evening lessons, that she realized something troubling. During that heated exchange, when she had stood so close to the Duke, matching him word for word, she had felt more alive than at any point in her carefully circumscribed life. It was a dangerous feeling, one that had no place in the heart of a governess. But as winter settled over Ashbourne Hall, Eleanor would discover that some feelings, once ignited, are impossible to extinguish, no matter how much propriety demands it. Winter transformed Ashbourne Hall into a realm of crystalline beauty and enforced intimacy. Heavy snows made travel to London impossible for weeks at a time, trapping the Duke at his estate far longer than his usual brief visits. Eleanor found her carefully maintained distance increasingly difficult to preserve. The Duke, it seemed, had taken her words to heart. He began joining the children for their evening meal twice weekly, then 3 times, then daily. He listened to Lord Thomas expound on Roman military tactics. He examined Lady Catherine's paintings with serious attention. He allowed Lady Amelia to climb into his lap and fall asleep against his shoulder as Eleanor read aloud from The Tales of King Arthur. And he watched Eleanor herself with an intensity that made her acutely self-conscious. "You have wrought a miracle, Miss Hartley," said Lady Margaret Thornton one grey December afternoon. Lady Margaret, the Duke's aunt, had arrived for the Christmas season, a whirlwind of elegant silk and astute observations. She had sought Eleanor out in the schoolroom, ostensibly to observe a lesson, but her true purpose quickly became apparent. "I have merely provided structure and attention, my lady," Eleanor replied, uncomfortable with the praise. "Nonsense. You have given them something far more valuable, the sense that they matter." Lady Margaret settled into a chair near the window, watching as the children worked on their various projects across the room. "My nephew has been lost since Isabel died. Guilt, I suspect. He was in London when she took ill. By the time he returned, she was already gone. He threw himself into his work, his parliamentary duties, anything to avoid feeling. The children suffered for it." "He is suffering as well," Eleanor said quietly, surprising herself with the defense. "Grief makes us do irrational things." Lady Margaret's sharp blue eyes fixed on Eleanor with knowing precision. "You understand loss yourself, I perceive. Your father? 2 years ago. My mother soon after fell into invalidism." Eleanor kept her attention fixed on Lady Catherine's arithmetic, unwilling to meet that penetrating gaze. "One learns to carry on." "Indeed one does. But Nicholas, the Duke, he has carried on in entirely the wrong direction. This engagement to Lady Charlotte Pemberton, for instance, a disaster in the making." Eleanor's hands stilled on the paper she was reviewing. She had heard whispers among the servants about the engagement, formally announced, just before the snows came. Lady Charlotte was reportedly everything a duchess should be, impossibly beautiful, impeccably connected, and possessed of a fortune that would restore the estate's depleted coffers. The late Duchess's medical care and the subsequent management of grief-stricken children had taken their financial toll. "I am certain His Grace knows his own mind in such matters," Eleanor said carefully. On the contrary, he is being entirely practical and thoroughly miserable about it. Charlotte is a cold, ambitious creature who views the children as inconvenient obstacles to her social ascension. She visited once last month and spent the entire time cataloguing how she would redecorate and modernize Ashbourne. She did not speak to the children once, not once, Eleanor. The use of her Christian name was deliberate, an invitation to confidence. Eleanor hesitated, then spoke the truth that had been weighing on her heart. "It is not my place to have opinions on His Grace's personal affairs, my lady. But you do have them, do you not?" Lady Margaret smiled. "I am not blind, child. I see how you look at him when you think no one notices. And more dangerously, I see how he looks at you." Eleanor's cheeks flamed. "My lady, I assure you—" "Peace, Eleanor. I am not accusing you of impropriety, but I am warning you. The engagement will be formalized with great ceremony in the new year. Lady Charlotte expects to be married by spring. My nephew believes he is doing his duty, securing his children's future with a suitable marriage. He does not yet realize he is about to make the greatest mistake of his life." Before Eleanor could respond, the schoolroom door opened, and the Duke himself entered, stamping snow from his boots. He had been riding despite the weather, and his cheeks were ruddy with cold, his dark hair windswept. He looked vital and alive in a way that made Eleanor's breath catch. "Aunt Margaret, I should have known you would invade the schoolroom," he said with genuine affection. "Miss Hartley, forgive the intrusion. I wanted to inform you that Lady Charlotte and her parents will be arriving tomorrow for a fortnight's visit. She has expressed interest in meeting the children properly." "Of course, Your Grace," Eleanor managed, her voice admirably steady. "I shall ensure they are prepared." "You look skeptical, Miss Hartley," the Duke observed, and there was something in his gaze, a challenge, an invitation to honesty. Eleanor chose her words carefully. "I am certain Lady Charlotte will charm the children with time and attention, Your Grace." "A diplomat's answer." His mouth quirked. "Let me rephrase. Do you believe my children will accept my future wife?" The schoolroom had gone silent. Even the children were watching now, tension thick in the air. "I believe, Your Grace, that children are remarkably perceptive. They will accept the person you choose if that person demonstrates genuine care for their welfare. And if she does not?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Eleanor met his eyes directly. "Then you will have a very difficult household, Your Grace. But I am confident you will make the choice that serves your family's best interests." Something flickered in his expression, disappointment, relief. Before Eleanor could decipher it, he nodded curtly and departed, leaving a silence that seemed to echo with everything unsaid. The arrival of Lady Charlotte Pemberton the following day was an event of considerable grandeur. Her carriage was magnificent, her wardrobe stunning, and her beauty absolutely undeniable. She was a vision of golden curls, porcelain skin, and a figure that made Eleanor acutely conscious of her own plain appearance. Lady Charlotte swept through Ashbourne Hall like a queen claiming her kingdom, immediately demanding changes to the decor and the menu. The children took an instant visceral dislike to her. "She smells like too many flowers," Lady Amelia whispered to Eleanor at dinner that first evening. "And she looks at us like we're mice she wants to drown." It was, unfortunately, an accurate assessment. Lady Charlotte had greeted the children with the barest civility before dismissing them entirely. When Lord Thomas attempted to discuss his studies, she had yawned openly. When Lady Catherine shyly presented a watercolour as a welcoming gift, Lady Charlotte had glanced at it with a dismissive, "How charming," before handing it to a servant as though it were refuse. Eleanor watched the Duke throughout these interactions, trying to understand what he saw in this woman. Lady Charlotte was certainly everything society demanded, beautiful, wealthy, accomplished in all the appropriate arts. But there was a calculating coldness to her that seemed at odds with the man Eleanor had come to know through his children, a man capable of gentleness, of dry humour, of surprising moments of vulnerability. 3 days into the visit, Eleanor made a fatal error. She was descending from the nursery wing after settling the children for the night when she encountered Lady Charlotte in the corridor below, clearly waiting for her. "Miss Hartley," Lady Charlotte said, her voice honeyed poison. "How fortuitous. I have been meaning to speak with you about your position here." "My lady," Eleanor stopped on the staircase, suddenly wary. "I want you to understand something very clearly." Lady Charlotte's beautiful face hardened into something ugly with spite. "When I become Duchess of Ashbourne, many changes will be implemented. The children will be sent to appropriate boarding institutions. This practice of allowing them to run wild under the supervision of a barely educated country vicar's daughter will cease immediately. Your services will no longer be required." Eleanor felt as though she had been struck. "The Duke has not mentioned such plans." "The Duke," Lady Charlotte said with venomous emphasis, "does not yet understand what is best for his household. But he will learn. I have not worked this carefully to secure the wealthiest peer in the north, only to be undermined by a governess with presumptions above her station. I have seen how you look at him, Miss Hartley. Do not think I am blind to your pathetic ambitions." "I have no ambitions beyond educating my charges," Eleanor said, but her voice shook. "Then you are either a liar or a fool. Either way, enjoy your remaining months here. Come spring, you will be seeking employment elsewhere, without a reference, I assure you. I will see to that personally." Lady Charlotte swept past, leaving Eleanor trembling on the stairs. The threat was clear and credible. A duchess's word could destroy Eleanor's reputation entirely, making her unemployable in any respectable household. More devastatingly, the thought of the children being sent away, particularly little Amelia, who still had nightmares and needed reassurance, it was unbearable. Eleanor fled to her quarters and allowed herself the luxury of tears, something she rarely indulged. She wept for the children, for herself, for the impossible situation she found herself in. And she wept, though she barely admitted it even to herself, for the loss of something that had never been hers to begin with. Those moments in the schoolroom when the Duke's eyes had met hers over the children's heads, filled with warmth and something that might have been longing. A soft knock interrupted her misery. Eleanor hastily dried her eyes and opened the door to find Lady Margaret standing in the corridor, her expression troubled. "I overheard Charlotte's little performance," the older woman said without preamble. "She will make good on her threats, Eleanor. She is vindictive and determined. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "What can I do, my lady? She will be Duchess. I am nobody." "You are the woman my nephew is falling in love with," Lady Margaret said bluntly. "And unless I am very much mistaken, you feel the same. So the question becomes, are you brave enough to fight for what you want, or will you allow that poisonous creature to destroy not only your future, but the futures of 3 innocent children and a good man who is about to commit himself to a lifetime of misery?" Eleanor stared at her, shocked speechless by the audacity of the suggestion. But before she could formulate a response, Lady Margaret continued, "The engagement ball is in 3 weeks, to be held here at Ashbourne. Charlotte has planned it as her triumph, her public claiming of the Duke. But balls have a way of revealing truths, my dear, and I believe it is time for some truths to be revealed. Do you trust me?" Eleanor thought of the children's faces, of the Duke's rare smiles, of the life she had briefly glimpsed before Lady Charlotte had shattered it. She thought of her mother's words, spoken years ago. "Sometimes, Eleanor, the greatest courage lies not in acceptance, but in fighting for what we know is right." "Yes, my lady," Eleanor whispered. "I trust you." Lady Margaret smiled, and there was steel beneath the silk. "Then let us begin planning. It is time for the governess to come out of the shadows." The 3 weeks preceding the engagement ball passed in a peculiar tension. Lady Charlotte, having delivered her threat, treated Eleanor with dismissive cruelty, often contradicting her instructions to the children and undermining her authority at every opportunity. The Duke, absorbed in preparations and his parliamentary correspondence, seemed oblivious to the undercurrents destroying his household. But the children noticed, and they rebelled. Lord Thomas became sullen and defiant, refusing to complete his assignments. Lady Catherine grew tearful and withdrawn, her artwork turning dark and melancholic. Little Amelia began having nightmares again, crying out for her mother in the depths of night. It was during one such episode, when Eleanor sat on the child's bed soothing her back to sleep, that the Duke appeared in the nursery doorway. He stood there in his shirt sleeves and waistcoat, his cravat loosened, looking utterly lost as he watched Eleanor comfort his daughter with a tenderness that seemed to cause him physical pain. "She asks for Isabel," he said quietly, when Amelia finally slept. "I hear her some nights. I come to the door, but I never know what to say. How do I explain to a 6-year-old that her mother is never coming back?" Eleanor rose carefully, tucking the blankets around the sleeping child. In the dim lamplight, with his carefully maintained authority stripped away, the Duke looked heartbreakingly human. "You tell her the truth, Your Grace, that her mother loved her very much. That love does not end with death, that it is acceptable to grieve and to remember and to slowly heal." Eleanor paused, then added softly, "and that she is not alone, that she has a father who loves her, even if he struggles to show it." "I am not good at this," the Duke admitted, and there was such naked vulnerability in his voice that Eleanor's heart ached. "I was raised to manage estates, to sit in Parliament, to fulfill dynastic obligations, not to comfort frightened children or understand their needs. Isabel was the warm one, the loving one. I was always too formal, too distant. Now she is gone, and I do not know how to be what they need." Without thinking, Eleanor crossed to him, standing close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, the lines of grief and responsibility etched around his mouth. "You are learning, Your Grace. These past weeks, you have been present for them. That is what matters. They do not need perfection. They need their father. They need stability, security, a proper family." His eyes met hers, and Eleanor could not breathe at the intensity she found there. "That is why I am marrying Charlotte. To give them a mother, to restore the family's finances, to fulfill my obligations." "And what of happiness, Your Grace? Yours and theirs?" "Happiness," he said with bitter irony, "is a luxury men in my position cannot afford. We marry for duty, for alliance, for the continuation of our line. Personal feelings are irrelevant." "Are they?" Eleanor challenged. "Because when I look at you during dinner with Lady Charlotte, I see a man going through motions. When I see you with your children, I see a man coming alive. And when—" She stopped abruptly, horrified at what she had been about to say. "When what, Eleanor?" His use of her Christian name sent electricity through her. He stepped closer, and suddenly they were standing in a space far too intimate for propriety, his height forcing her to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Finish your thought, please." "It is not my place, Your Grace." "Nicholas." His voice was low, rough with some emotion she dared not name. "In this moment, alone in the darkness, with my daughter sleeping and the world locked outside, I am simply Nicholas, and I am asking you to speak truthfully." "When what, Eleanor?" "When you look at me," she whispered, "I see a man who wishes things were different. But wishing changes nothing, Your G. Nicholas, you have made your choice. Lady Charlotte will be your Duchess. I will be dismissed. The children will be sent away. And we will all fulfill our duties and pretend that duty is enough." For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and Eleanor saw a battle rage behind his eyes. Duty against desire, obligation against yearning. Then, with visible effort, he stepped back, restoring the proper distance. "You are right, of course. Forgive my familiarity, Miss Hartley. It was inappropriate." His voice had returned to its usual formal coolness, though Eleanor heard the effort it cost him. "The ball is in 4 days. I trust the children will be prepared to make a brief appearance?" "Yes, Your Grace." Eleanor's own voice sounded dead to her ears. "They have been practicing their curtsies and bows." "Excellent. Good night, Miss Hartley." He left without looking back, and Eleanor sank into the chair beside Amelia's bed, trembling with the force of what had almost happened. She had been moments away from absolute disaster. from confessing feelings that could only bring ruin to them both. But Lady Margaret had other plans. On the morning of the ball, the older woman appeared in the schoolroom with a large box and a conspiratorial smile. "The children will be attending the first hour of the ball, as is proper," she announced. "But what is not generally known is that their governess will be attending as well as my personal guest and companion." Eleanor's shock must have shown on her face because Lady Margaret laughed. "My dear child, I am a dowager countess in my own right. I may invite whom I please. You will attend, you will be properly attired, and you will remind my foolish nephew of what he is about to throw away. I have taken the liberty of having a gown prepared. Do not argue. This is not a request." The dress that emerged from the box was the most beautiful thing Eleanor had ever seen. It was not ostentatiously fashionable. Lady Margaret was too clever for that. Instead, it was elegant and understated. Deep sapphire silk that would bring out the color of Eleanor's eyes, cut in clean lines that flattered without overwhelming. With it came appropriate accessories, gloves, slippers, and a simple but exquisite necklace of pearls. "I cannot accept this," Eleanor protested weakly, even as her fingers traced the luxurious fabric. "You can, and you will. Tonight, Eleanor Hartley, you will not be a governess. You will be a lady of quality, which you are by birth and education, if not by current circumstance, and you will make a certain duke realize what a catastrophic mistake he is about to make." The ball was a spectacle of splendor. Ashbourne Hall's ballroom blazed with hundreds of candles, reflecting off gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers. The cream of Yorkshire society had assembled, along with notable figures from London, to celebrate the engagement of the Duke of Ashbourne to Lady Charlotte Pemberton. The bride-to-be held court like a queen, magnificent in white and gold, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. Eleanor entered on Lady Margaret's arm, her stomach churning with anxiety. The children had already made their appearance and been escorted back to the nursery by Nurse Pritchard. Now Eleanor stood at the threshold of a world to which she did not belong, acutely conscious of every eye that turned toward them. "Chin up, my dear," Lady Margaret murmured. "You look absolutely lovely, and more importantly, you look like yourself, intelligent, genuine, and beautiful in a way that requires no artifice." As if summoned by some primal instinct, the Duke's gaze found Eleanor across the crowded ballroom. She watched his expression shift from polite attention to stunned recognition to something far more dangerous. He stood beside Lady Charlotte on a raised dais, preparing for the formal announcement of their engagement, but his eyes remained fixed on Eleanor, with an intensity that made her knees weak. Lady Charlotte noticed. Her beautiful face twisted with fury, and she tightened her grip on the Duke's arm possessively. "Ah," Lady Margaret said with satisfaction. "And so it begins." The evening progressed with agonizing slowness. Eleanor stood with Lady Margaret, declining all requests to dance, watching as the Duke performed his duties with mechanical precision. He danced the first dance with Lady Charlotte, walked with her among the guests, played the role of devoted fiancé with flawless execution. But his eyes kept returning to Eleanor, and each glance was a dagger to her heart. It was during the supper interval that disaster, or perhaps fate, intervened. Eleanor had sought refuge on a secluded balcony, needing air and distance from the suffocating spectacle inside. She stood in the February cold, letting the chill clear her head, when she heard his voice behind her. "You should not be out here, Eleanor. You will catch cold." She turned to find Nicholas, for she could no longer think of him as merely the Duke, standing in the doorway, backlit by the ballroom's glow. He had removed his formal jacket, his white shirt gleaming in the moonlight, and he looked as tortured as she felt. "I needed air, Your Grace." "Nicholas," he corrected, stepping onto the balcony and closing the French doors behind him. "We are alone again, Eleanor. In the darkness, away from duty and expectation. I am simply Nicholas, and I must tell you, I must say this once, even if saying it damns us both. Don't." Eleanor held up a hand, her voice breaking. "Please, Nicholas, do not say what cannot be unsaid. I love you." The words emerged hoarse, desperate, undeniable, I'm engaged to another woman. I'm about to announce my marriage before 200 guests, and I am standing here telling you that I love you. I have loved you since you stood in my study and told me I was failing my children. I have loved you every moment I watched you with them, patient and kind and utterly yourself. I love your intelligence, your courage, your refusal to be diminished by circumstance, and I am losing you because I am a coward who chose duty over love. You are not a coward, Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. You are an honorable man doing what you believe is right for your children. Is it right? Is it right to marry a woman I do not love while sending away the woman I adore? Is it right to condemn my children to a stepmother who views them as inconveniences? Is it right to sacrifice all our happiness on the altar of duty and financial stability? I don't know, Eleanor sobbed. I don't know what is right anymore. I only know that I love you too. I love you impossibly, inappropriately, with my whole heart. And it changes nothing. You will marry Lady Charlotte in the spring. I will seek another position. And we will both survive, because that is what honorable people do. Nicholas closed the distance between them in 2 strides, and suddenly she was in his arms, and his mouth was on hers, and the world disappeared. The kiss was everything she had never allowed herself to imagine, fierce and tender, desperate and reverent, a claiming and a surrender all at once. Eleanor's arms went around his neck, her fingers threading through his hair, her body molding to his as if they had been created to fit together exactly this way. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor could taste salt, her tears, or perhaps his. "Come away with me," Nicholas said urgently. "Now! Tonight! We will go to Scotland, marry there, damn the scandal. I will give up the title if I must. We will live simply, but we will be together, you, me, the children. A real family. Say yes, Eleanor. Please say yes." For one perfect crystalline moment, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine it. A small house somewhere far from this glittering, judgmental world. Nicholas teaching Thomas to ride, Eleanor giving art lessons to Catherine, Amelia laughing without fear. Simple dinners, quiet evenings, the freedom to love openly without shame or constraint. It was everything she wanted, and it was impossible. "No," she whispered, and watched something die in his eyes. "I cannot let you destroy yourself and your children for me. The scandal would follow us everywhere. Lord Thomas would never inherit, his reputation destroyed before he reaches adulthood. Your family would be ruined, your name disgraced. And eventually, Nicholas, you would come to resent me for what you had sacrificed. I love you too much to let you make that choice." "Eleanor." "No." She stepped back, out of his arms, though it felt like tearing away part of her own soul. "Go inside. Announce your engagement. Marry Lady Charlotte, fulfill your duty, and let me go. Please, Nicholas, if you love me at all, let me go." "I will love you until I die," he said, and his voice broke on the words. "And I will regret this moment for the rest of my life." "As will I," Eleanor whispered. "But we will survive it, because we are stronger than our desires. Goodbye, Nicholas." She fled the balcony, through the ballroom where she vaguely registered Lady Margaret's stricken face, down corridors and upstairs until she reached her quarters in the East Wing. There, finally alone, Eleanor Hartley collapsed and wept for the life she could never have and the love she could never claim. In the ballroom below, the Duke of Ashbourne stood beside Lady Charlotte Pemberton and prepared to announce their engagement, his heart shattered beyond repair, playing the role duty demanded with nothing but ashes inside. The days following the ball were unbearable. Eleanor went through the motions of her duties with mechanical precision, teaching lessons she barely remembered, comforting children while dying inside. Nicholas avoided her entirely, conducting his brief visits with the children only when Eleanor was absent. Lady Charlotte, sensing her victory, became insufferable, openly mocking Eleanor in front of the servants and already making arrangements for the children's removal to boarding institutions. "The wedding is set for the 1st of April. Lady Margaret informed Eleanor one grey morning, finding her in the schoolroom while the children were at their music lesson. 6 weeks from now. Charlotte is already planning how she will redecorate this room into a sitting chamber for her personal use. She refers to the nursery wing as wasted space. "It no longer concerns me, my lady," Eleanor said dully. "I have accepted a position with a family in Cornwall beginning in May. It was the furthest from Yorkshire I could manage." Lady Margaret studied her with troubled eyes. "You look like a ghost, child. Have you eaten anything in the past 3 days?" "I am not hungry. My nephew looks no better. He moves through the house like a man condemned. Even Charlotte has complained about his lack of enthusiasm for the wedding preparations." Lady Margaret paused, then said carefully, "Eleanor, I know something happened the night of the ball. I saw him follow you to the balcony. I saw your face when you returned. And I have seen 2 people destroy themselves for the sake of propriety ever since. It is not propriety, my lady. It is necessity. The Duke has obligations." "The Duke," Lady Margaret interrupted sharply, "is about to make an irrevocable mistake that will destroy not only himself, but 3 innocent children. And you, dear girl, are so busy being noble that you cannot see the damage your nobility is causing." Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion erupted from the hallway. Nurse Pritchard's voice, high with panic, called out, "Miss Hartley, come quickly, it's Lady Amelia." Eleanor ran, her heart seizing with terror. She found the elderly nurse outside Amelia's bedroom, wringing her hands in distress. "She won't come out, miss. She's barricaded herself inside and she's crying something awful. Keeps saying she wants her mama and won't let anyone near her." Eleanor knelt beside the locked door, pressing her palm against the wood. "Amelia, darling, it's Miss Hartley. Can you let me in?" "No." The child's voice was thick with tears and unmistakable terror. "I heard Lady Charlotte talking. She said I'm going away to school. She said I'm too much trouble. I want my mama. I want Miss Hartley. I don't want to go away." Eleanor's heart shattered. She had known this was coming. Lady Charlotte had made no secret of her plans, but hearing the devastation in Amelia's voice made it unbearably real. "Sweetheart, I promise I will not let anyone take you away against your will. But you must open the door so we can talk properly. Please, Amelia, trust me." After a long moment, the lock clicked. Eleanor slipped inside to find the little girl huddled on her bed, face blotchy with tears, clutching a miniature portrait of her late mother. The sight was so heartbreaking that Eleanor gathered the child into her arms without hesitation, holding her while she sobbed. "I don't want a new mama," Amelia wept. "I want my real mama. And I want you. Why can't you be our mama? Papa smiles when you're near. He never smiles with Lady Charlotte. Don't you love us?" "Oh, darling, I love you all so much," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her own face, "more than you could possibly know." "Then why are you leaving? Why is Papa marrying the mean lady instead of you?" There was no answer Eleanor could give that would make sense to a 6-year-old. She simply held Amelia and rocked her, humming the lullaby she had learned from the child's nurse, until the sobs subsided into hiccups. She did not hear the door open, did not know anyone else had entered, until Nicholas's anguished voice said, "Dear God, what have I done?" Eleanor looked up to find him standing in the doorway, Lady Margaret behind him. His face was ravaged, all aristocratic composure stripped away. He crossed the room in swift strides and sank onto the bed beside them, gathering both Amelia and Eleanor into his arms. "I am so sorry," he said into his daughter's hair. "I am so desperately sorry, little one. You're not going anywhere. No boarding school, no separation, I promise you." "But Lady Charlotte said—" "Lady Charlotte," Nicholas said firmly, "does not make decisions about this family. I do, and I have made a terrible mistake, one I intend to correct immediately." Eleanor pulled back, searching his face. "Nicholas, what are you saying?" "I am saying that my aunt was right. I have been so concerned with duty and obligation that I forgot the most fundamental duty of all, to protect my children's happiness, and my own." He looked at Eleanor with such intensity she could barely breathe. I am saying that I would rather face scandal and financial ruin than spend one more day watching you slowly die inside. I am saying that I was a coward on that balcony, and I will not be a coward any longer. But the engagement will be broken today, now. Nicholas stood, still holding Amelia, his other hand reaching for Eleanor. I should have done this the morning after the ball. I should have done it the day Charlotte threatened you in the corridor. Yes, Eleanor. My aunt informed me of that charming conversation. I should have done it the moment I realized I loved you. But I was too concerned with what society would think, what my peers would say, whether my pride could withstand the gossip. He set Amelia gently on the bed and cupped Eleanor's face in his hands. But none of that matters compared to this. My children need a mother who loves them. I need a woman who challenges me, who sees me as a man rather than a title, who makes me want to be better than I am. And that woman is you, Eleanor Hartley. It has always been you. The scandal will be enormous, Eleanor whispered, even as hope began to unfurl in her chest like a flower turning towards sunlight. Your reputation. Let them talk. Let them gossip and speculate and judge. I am the Duke of Ashbourne. My ancestors have survived wars, plagues, and political upheavals. I think we can survive some wagging tongues. He smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Eleanor had seen from him in weeks. Besides, my aunt informs me that half the ton secretly roots for love matches, and the other half will be too busy discussing Charlotte's humiliation to focus on us for long. She deserves the humiliation, Lady Margaret said crisply from the doorway. The woman is venomous, though I suspect her fury will be considerable. Draw as if summoned by her name. Lady Charlotte's voice rang out from the hallway, shrill with indignation. Nicholas, Nicholas, where are you? I have been searching everywhere. We must finalize the menu for the wedding breakfast, and you keep avoiding... She appeared in the doorway and stopped dead, taking in the scene, the Duke holding the governess's face tenderly, little Amelia watching with wide, hopeful eyes, Lady Margaret looking supremely satisfied. What, Lady Charlotte said in a voice like ice cracking, is the meaning of this? Nicholas released Eleanor and turned to face his fiancée with admirable composure. Lady Charlotte, I owe you an apology and an explanation. I have made a grave error in judgment, one that I must now correct. If this is about the children attending the wedding, I have already agreed they may participate in the ceremony, though I still think it is not about the children attending the wedding. Nicholas interrupted. It is about there being no wedding. I cannot marry you, Charlotte. I am sorry for the pain and embarrassment this will cause, but I cannot in good conscience proceed with this engagement. The silence that followed was deafening. Lady Charlotte's beautiful face cycled through shock, disbelief, and finally settled on incandescent rage. You cannot be serious. The invitations have been sent, the settlement signed, my trousseau ordered. You would humiliate me in front of all society because of this nobody? She gestured viciously at Eleanor. She is a governess, Nicholas, the penniless daughter of an impoverished vicar. She has nothing to recommend her but a tolerably pretty face and aspirations far above her station. She has everything to recommend her, Nicholas said quietly but with steel beneath the words. Intelligence, kindness, courage, and a genuine love for my children. She sees me as a man, not a title or a fortune, and I love her. I am sorry, Charlotte, but I love her. I should have been honest about that from the beginning, instead of trying to make a practical match work. You will be ruined, Lady Charlotte shrieked. Both of you! I will see to it personally. No one in society will receive you. Your children will be ostracized, and when your precious governess realizes what she has cost you, she will despise you for it. Then we will manage, Nicholas replied. Together. Lady Charlotte's composure shattered completely. She unleashed a torrent of invective that made even Lady Margaret raise her eyebrows, calling Eleanor every degrading name imaginable and threatening lawsuits, social destruction, and worse. Nicholas endured it with stoic patience until she finally swept from the room in a whirlwind of skirts and fury. In the ringing silence that followed, Amelia began to giggle. Then Lord Thomas and Lady Catherine, who had apparently crept in during the confrontation, joined her. Soon all three children were laughing with near hysterical relief. "Does this mean Miss Hartley is staying?" Thomas asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but failing utterly. "If she will have us," Nicholas said, turning back to Eleanor. "And if she will consider accepting a proposal from a foolish duke who nearly threw away the best thing that ever happened to him." Eleanor found herself laughing and crying simultaneously. "I am a governess with no fortune and only a modest education, Your Grace. Society will say you have lost your mind." "Then I am quite mad," Nicholas agreed, drawing her close once more. "And I have no intention of seeking sanity. Eleanor Hartley, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Will you be a mother to my impossible, wonderful children? Will you spend your days arguing with me about pedagogy and challenging my assumptions and reminding me that titles matter far less than character?" "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "Yes to all of it. Always yes." And as Nicholas kissed her in front of his delighted children and his triumphant aunt, Eleanor realized that sometimes the greatest courage lies not in accepting one's place, but in daring to claim the life one deserves. Scandal be damned. The scandal was, as predicted, spectacular. For 3 weeks, the drawing rooms of London and the estates of Yorkshire could speak of nothing else. The Duke of Ashbourne had jilted the beautiful, wealthy Lady Charlotte Pemberton mere weeks before their wedding to marry his children's governess. The gossip sheets had a field day, speculating wildly about secret affairs, enchantments, and loss of sanity. Lady Charlotte, true to her threats, attempted to poison Eleanor's reputation thoroughly. She claimed Eleanor had seduced the Duke, manipulated the children, and schemed from the beginning to elevate herself. Some believed her, many did not, and the Duke's response to the gossip was to accelerate the wedding plans rather than retreat from public view. "Let them see we are not ashamed," he declared. "We have done nothing wrong except choose love over convenience. If society cannot accept that, then we will make our own society." The wedding took place in early April at Ashbourne Hall's private chapel, a far cry from the grand cathedral ceremony Lady Charlotte had planned, but infinitely more meaningful. Eleanor wore a simple gown of ivory silk, with wildflowers from the estate gardens woven into her hair. Lady Margaret served as matron of honour. Lord Thomas, Lady Catherine, and Lady Amelia stood proudly as witnesses, beaming throughout the ceremony. The guest list was small. A few local families who valued character over convention, several of Nicholas's more progressive parliamentary colleagues, and a surprising number of servants who had quietly come to love their new mistress. As Nicholas slipped a gold ring onto Eleanor's finger and spoke his vows with absolute conviction, she knew that despite the scandal, despite the gossip, they had made the right choice. The honeymoon was delayed so Eleanor could complete the children's spring term lessons, a decision that made the children adore her even more. Instead, they spent quiet weeks at Ashbourne Hall, learning to be a family. Nicholas scaled back his parliamentary obligations significantly, choosing to vote by proxy on routine matters and travel to London only when absolutely necessary. The children flourished under their parents' joint attention. By midsummer, the worst of the scandal had faded. A more shocking divorce case had captured society's attention, and gradually the invitations began to arrive again. Some families never forgave the breach of propriety, but others, particularly those with happy marriages of their own, quietly welcomed the Duke and his new Duchess back into circulation. Eleanor discovered she had unexpected allies. Several noble women who had themselves married for love rather than position sought her out, forming friendships based on mutual understanding rather than social obligation. Lady Margaret, naturally, became her greatest defender and closest confidant. The most gratifying changes, however, occurred within Ashbourne Hall itself. The nursery wing rang with laughter instead of the tense silence that had pervaded it under Lady Charlotte's brief influence. Lord Thomas, now assured of his father's attention and his stepmother's genuine affection, became a serious, thoughtful young man who excelled at his studies and showed early promise in estate management. Lady Catherine's artistic talents flourished under Eleanor's encouragement, and several of her paintings earned praise from notable artists. Little Amelia grew from a frightened, clinging child into a confident, joyful girl who still called Eleanor Miss Hartley as often as Mamma, considering it a term of endearment rather than formality, and Nicholas, the Duke of Ashbourne, transformed before his household's eyes. The cold, distant aristocrat who had hidden his grief behind duty and obligation became a man who laughed openly, played with his children, and looked at his wife with such adoration that even the most cynical servants found it touching. One golden autumn afternoon, precisely a year after Eleanor's arrival at Ashbourne Hall, she stood in the garden watching her family. Nicholas was teaching Thomas to fence, both of them focused and intense. Catherine sat nearby with her watercolours, attempting to capture the scene. Amelia chased butterflies through the roses, her laughter carried on the breeze. "Are you content, Your Grace?" Lady Margaret asked, appearing at Eleanor's elbow with her customary quiet precision. "More than I ever dreamed possible, my lady," Eleanor replied honestly, "though I still occasionally wake up certain this is all an elaborate dream." "No dream, child, simply the life you deserved and had the courage to claim." Lady Margaret squeezed her hand. "I received a letter from an acquaintance in London yesterday. Apparently, Lady Charlotte has accepted an offer from Lord Pemberton's heir, a very wealthy, very old baron with multiple estates and a preference for wives who value position over affection. She will be precisely as miserable as she deserves." "I should feel sorry for her," Eleanor mused, "but I confess I cannot quite manage it. Nor should you. She threatened your livelihood and your happiness. That she failed is her own doing." Lady Margaret's expression softened. "You have given my nephew back his life, Eleanor. More than that, you have given him joy. I will be forever grateful to you for that." As if sensing their discussion, Nicholas looked up from his fencing lesson and caught Eleanor's eye. The smile he gave her was private, intimate, filled with promise and remembered passion. Even after months of marriage, Eleanor felt her pulse quicken at that look. "Papa is utterly besotted," Catherine observed, without looking up from her painting. "It is quite embarrassing, actually. Miss Thornton at church said her parents barely speak to each other, but Papa cannot go an hour without finding an excuse to seek you out." "Your papa," Eleanor said with amusement, "is demonstrative. There is no shame in that." "I think it is romantic," Amelia declared, abandoning her butterfly pursuit to throw herself into Eleanor's skirts. "When I grow up, I want a husband who looks at me the way Papa looks at you, like you are made of sunshine and magic." Eleanor lifted the little girl into her arms, her heart swelling with love for this child who had once been so lost and frightened. "Then you must choose someone who values your mind and your heart, not just your face or your fortune. Like Papa chose you." "Exactly like that." Later that evening, after the children were settled in bed and the house had grown quiet, Eleanor found Nicholas in the library where they had shared so many stolen moments during her governess days. He stood by the window, a glass of brandy in his hand, staring out at the moonlit grounds. "Regretting your choice, Your Grace," Eleanor teased, slipping her arms around his waist from behind. Nicholas turned in her embrace, setting down his glass to frame her face with both hands. "Every day I thank God you were stubborn enough to argue with me in my study, brave enough to stand on that balcony and break both our hearts, and generous enough to give me a second chance I did not deserve." "We gave each other a second chance," Eleanor corrected. "At happiness, at family, at love. I was dying in Cornwall before I came here, slowly suffocating under the weight of duty and limited expectations. You gave me back my life as much as I gave you back yours." "Then we are perfectly matched," Nicholas murmured, lowering his head to kiss her with a tenderness that had not diminished despite their now legitimate intimacy. And I intend to spend the rest of my life ensuring you never regret becoming the Duchess of Ashbourne." "The only thing I regret," Eleanor said with mock severity, "is that you waited so long to ask. Think of all the months we wasted being noble and miserable when we could have been scandalously happy." "Then let us make up for lost time," Nicholas said, sweeping her into his arms with a grin that made him look years younger. "After all, we have a reputation for impropriety to maintain. It would be a shame to disappoint the gossips by becoming respectable." As he carried her toward their chambers, Eleanor laughed with pure joy, the sound echoing through Ashbourne Hall like a benediction. She had been hired to tame the Duke's rebellious children and had ended up taming the Duke himself. Or perhaps, she reflected, neither had been tamed at all. Perhaps they had simply found the freedom to be their truest selves. A governess who dared to dream beyond her station, a duke who chose love over duty, and 3 children who learned that family is not defined by blood or obligation, but by genuine affection and mutual respect. In the grand tapestry of English aristocratic history, their story would be a footnote, a minor scandal quickly forgotten amid larger dramas. But for those who lived it, for the family that formed in defiance of convention and flourished in spite of opposition, it was everything. It was love. And love, as Eleanor now knew with absolute certainty, was worth any scandal society could devise. If you've enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments from which part of the world you're listening. I'd love to know how far this tale has traveled and what resonated most with you. Your support means everything and helps me continue bringing you more stories of courage, love, and second chances. Until next time, may you always have the courage to choose love over convention.